Just announced this afternoon, Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine has been approved for use in Singapore.
With Chinatown teeming with people ahead of Chinese New Year, one expert warns of a potential super spreader event.
And sources in Malaysia tell the Straits Times more businesses will reopen even when movement controls are extended. We'll have the latest from KL. Welcome to The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Kui.
And I'm Haryanto Diman. Of course, we're back today, Olivia.
That's right.
Yeah, you can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. Singapore has approved Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine for use here, with the first shipment expected to arrive in March.
In a statement today, the Health Sciences Authority said its review of the available clinical data found that the vaccine showed a high efficacy of 94%, with the benefits outweighing the risks.
Moderna is the second COVID-19 vaccine authorized for use here after the one by Pfizer-BioNTech. This vaccine requires 2 doses administered 28 days apart, compared with Pfizer's 21-day gap.
The Health Ministry will progressively roll out the vaccine for people 18 years old and above. So the side effects reported are similar to those who have taken the Pfizer vaccine, including pain, swelling at the injection site and fatigue.
Meanwhile, 18 new COVID-19 cases were confirmed as of noon today.
One case was in the community, while the other 17 were imported cases who had been placed on stay-home notice or isolated on arrival in Singapore. More details will be released later tonight.
From this Friday, foreign domestic workers and confinement nannies entering Singapore will have to undergo additional COVID-19 testing. They'll have to take a serology test on arrival, on top of a PCR test that has been mandatory since January 24th.
Separately, newly arrived work permit and S-Pass holders in the construction, marine and process sectors will now be required to undergo a 7-day testing regime after their stay-home notice. They will spend these 7 days at a designated facility and take additional swab tests when they start work.
The new measures will apply to workers with travel history in territories with a higher prevalence of infection.
Those celebrating Chinese New Year have a week or so to prepare for the festivities, and here's the scene at Chinatown complex at around 11:30 a.m. this morning. Doesn't look crowded at all, hey?
But yesterday, hundreds of shoppers flocked to the complex's wet market, hoping to stock up on ingredients for their reunion dinners. There was a queue to enter the market when the Straits Times was there yesterday, with a cap of 300 visitors at any given time.
Well, this weekend is the final weekend before CNY, so the crowds are expected to return then, as well as most of next week.
Joining us to share his expertise is Dr Leong Hoe Nam, infectious diseases specialist from the Rophi Clinic. Welcome back, Doctor. Now, sure, we've seen crowds thronging Chinatown in the lead up to Chinese New Year, but most people, if not all, are wearing masks. Plus, after 2020, people are more aware of good personal hygiene habits, including carrying hand sanitizer. So, Doctor, tell us, what are the risks of people gathering in Chinatown?
I think we are setting ourselves up for the perfect storm. We have Chinese New Year, we have the crowds. And honestly, what is Chinese New Year if you don't have the crowds? You're not pushing in to celebrate. But this is not the way to do it. This is exactly what the virus wants us to do, and this will create opportunity for the virus to spread. So we know, for one, social distancing works much better than the mask. So if we can, we should keep our distances. Where we don't have the distances, the mask should come in as a second level of protection. But masks are not good enough because, number one, people are literally using it as a mouth mask, but not a nose mask. It should cover the whole nose and mouth, and that's the way in which you block the transmission. So people are not wearing the mask correctly. Number two, they're not wearing the correct mask because they are not using a good certified surgical mask, or not even the mask given out by Temasek, but they're using a what's pretty, what's cosmetically agreeable, and these masks often do not have the protective filtering layer. You don't have the filtering layer, then as you breathe in the air, you're going to breathe in all the virus in at the same time. The third thing is the virus is adapting. Just as we are adapting to the virus and trying to cope with it with our new norms, the virus is trying to adapt by being more transmissible. We have stories of the B117 coming out from UK and the B1351 coming out from South Africa and the P1 coming out from South America, Brazil. So with all these three viruses, all of them are trying to hit a high value enemy, Singapore. They want to come into Singapore and transmit in Singapore. And the settings which we saw in the newspapers of Chinatown provides the right seedling, the fertile ground for new cases to breed. So Singaporeans, it's up to you and me. Do we want the COVID-19 to come back here again, or all of us chip in a little bit? Use social distancing, use better masks, use masks correctly, and keep the virus away. Can we all do it? I think we can. I believe in you, Singapore.
Well, Doc, as a preemptive move, the authorities will conduct a 2-day surveillance testing exercise for stall holders, shop owners, restaurant workers and food delivery workers who work in and around Chinatown. Now, this will start next Monday, February the 8th. But is that enough? What more can be done to minimize the risk of a super spreader event?
I think it is a start. As the hawkers will sell their wares and their foods, they will be coming across many people and they'll be talking to many people. In fact, there will be a high risk during the haggling or the pricing that they will actually pick it up. Doing this routine screening is typical of what Singapore does. We try to preempt where the people are, do screening that way. Unfortunately, it may not be enough because we are talking about the virus could show up tomorrow when you actually tested negative today. And then during this time, they could spread on to the next 5 or 7 clusters thereafter. And mind you, the place where they do the Chinatown selling is where they gather. And when they go home, when they go back home to work or go office to work, they're going to spread that to many clusters. So good move, but it is clearly not good enough. We need to get rid of the crowds, and I think it has to go back to education. What can we do? Can we tell them, try not to do there? If you have to, buy it for your friends so your friends have to come down. Do online sales instead. Make use of telecommunications and mobile phones. Place orders. Get rid of the queues. Get rid of hotspots. Make Singapore safe.
Doctor, let's take a look back at a year ago. Now, it may seem like a long time back, after the year that we've had, but let's take a look. 2 clusters emerged last CNY, the dinner at Safra Jurong and the family gathering at Mei Hwan Drive. By all means, let's have a meaningful celebration within the rules laid out, but what's your advice, generally for all of us for this year's festivities?
Advice is, number one, stick to the government rules about the number of people who can visit you, about the number of households there are. Stick to that, very important, because you realize when more people come in at the same spot at the same time, you're more likely to spread. I would like it if it is just one family with one family at one point in time, rather than one family to many. That's a no-go. Number 2, one thing which we didn't have in February last year was masks. And masks turned out to be a major turning event. It actually helped to control COVID-19 in Singapore. So mask is a very essential piece of equipment. When you visit a household, yes, the excitement is there, the happiness is there, you're grinning from year to year, but don't let them see your grin because I want to see the mask on the face. When the mask is on the face, it prevents transmission. So while you're in the house, keep your mask on. You only take it down to actually eat your tidbits and the tarts. And perhaps the mask is good for fatter people like me, is to remind myself not to eat so much during the Chinese New Year. The third thing that's very, very important is try to practice some distancing within a household. So you might be sitting here with your mask, but if possible, space them out. Don't cheer and sing too loudly because that is how the virus spreads. The B and the P, these are the ways in which the virus spreads very quickly. Now, then of course, keep this visit short because somebody else may want to come quickly after you. If you know someone's coming, leave the house so that the owners can actually have a break, clean up before the next family comes in, the second household which they're allowed to. So if all of us play it right, I think we can have a safe Chinese New Year and of course a safer Singapore. Remember, we are adapting to a new Chinese New Year. The virus is adapting to infect more of us.
Okay, well, you heard it from our expert infectious diseases specialist, Dr. Leong. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We've been speaking to Dr. Leong Hoe Nam from the Rophi Clinic.
In other local news, the Internal Security Department said it has adjusted its rehabilitation approach amid a trend of young people falling prey to terrorist ideology. For youth cases, ISD said additional attention is paid to address the non-ideological factors that led to their radicalization. These include their sense of belonging and identity, critical thinking skills to discern radical rhetoric online, as well as mental resilience to cope with life stresses. The statement follows news last month of the 16-year-old student who was detained after plotting terrorist attacks on two mosques here.
A fifth person has been sent to jail over offences involving the abuse of a mildly intellectually disabled friend to a near-death state. 34-year-old Haslinda Ismail was sentenced to 8.5 years jail today. Her crimes included striking the victim's mouth with a hammer, causing her to lose 2 teeth. She also urinated into a packet of hor fun and forced the victim to eat the soiled food. Haslinda is out on bail and will begin her sentence on March the 1st. Her husband, sister and 2 brothers have been sentenced. Her 70-year-old mother is also accused of taking part in the acts of torment, and her case is pending.
Now, premiering tonight, Close Up is the Straits Times' new investigative series that seeks to give a deeper look at issues that hit close to home.
The first episode follows our education correspondent as she traverses the darker side of social media platforms, where young girls and boys are often the target of strangers' sexual overtures.
She meets teens who have encountered sexual harassment and, in the worst cases, assault as a result of these online interactions.
Well, the episode airs later tonight at 8 p.m. on the Straits Times website, as well as our Facebook and YouTube channels.
At first, it started out just people asking me to go over their house, offering me money to go over, telling me what they want to sexually do to me. When I came back, I was either locking myself in the room or I would be crying. I think I was very anxious, so it made me just throw up.
When he came back, he wasn't wearing his pants. He just opened his towel, asked me to give him a blowjob. I remember he would grab my neck and then he would be just do it,
Across the causeway, according to industry and government sources, more sectors of Malaysia's economy will reopen even when movement control order is extended from Friday.
Beauty and grooming, retail and wholesale retailers, as well as car wash services. Now, these are some businesses expected to end 3 weeks of closure. Manufacturing and construction, which have been the main cause of new clusters this year, will also be expected to abide by tougher and costlier SOPs.
Senior Minister for Security Ismail Sabri Yaakob said yesterday that more leeway is given to economic sectors, especially small businesses, because a full lockdown will be most difficult for the poorest. But he also warned that the authorities will be imposing stricter guidelines and enforcing them more aggressively to curb the virus spread.
The Straits Times' Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teoh is here with the latest. Now, Shannon, MCO 1.0 managed to reduce daily COVID-19 infections to single digits. How come this second iteration wasn't as effective?
Well, Ollie, I think for starters, it's a lot looser. In the first MCO last year, practically everything was shut down, except for very specific essential services and businesses that supply that supply chain. So if it's for food, if it's for daily basic necessities, then you're allowed to open. So it was very limited and most people stayed at home. This time, the MCO is aimed more at trying to keep as many people home as possible, but ensuring that it doesn't adversely affect the economy too much. You're still trying to keep the machine purring, as it were. So you get things like manufacturing, like construction, agriculture, and a wide swath of services as well. They were still operating, but under certain guidelines. But what we've seen, in fact, is that 2/3 of new clusters last month were from these workplaces, the manufacturing sector, the construction sector, things like that. So the very thing we are saying that is crucial for the economy is the cause of most infections. Now we're talking about over 300 clusters. Last year during the MCO, we didn't have 300 new cases a day. So that's the scale of the level of infections that we have now. And of course, when you have this many infections, we've been talking about 4,000, 5,000 a day. What that means is that the system is really stretched. The healthcare is really stretched. Hospitals are full. There are not enough beds, which means that people who are positive are asked to do home quarantine if your symptoms are very mild or you have no symptoms at all. I mean, we know that this is not the best way to regulate people, not the best way to police people. If they are at home, they might meet the delivery guy for their Grab food. They might spread it to relatives, so on and so forth. It's never as safe as in a hospital. So we are trying to contain it rather than eradicate it this time. And obviously the containment is not working. What's happening is, if you look at the numbers clearly, people are passing it on faster than they can be treated for the disease.
Shannon, we understand new measures under this MCO extension will be announced. Any idea what they could be?
Well, we've got sources from both the government and in the economy, from industry sources, telling us that basically a lot of businesses are going to be open. If what they did before was have a list of stuff that can be open, now they're going to have a list of stuff that can't be open. So it's going to be a much shorter list. But what they're going to do is basically have stricter SOPs and more aggressive enforcement, more aggressive policing. So if, say, for example, before this on a factory floor, you would have to, stand 1 meter apart, they might do it 2 meters now. If before you could put 6 or 7 workers in a van to transport them to the factory, now you can only put 3. It's going to be costlier, but it's also necessary. What they want is for the workplaces to stop creating tens of thousands of cases. They've literally been responsible for tens of thousands of cases. So of course what we need is better compliance. If the workplaces, this is what people are saying, if the workplaces have caused so many clusters, clearly the businesses, the employers themselves are not serious about adhering to best practices, about adhering to guidelines. So we're probably going to see a lot more cops going into workplaces, things that we didn't really want to see before. It seemed like an invasion of privacy. It seemed like being very intrusive and disruptive to business. But we're in a situation right now where businesses are the main cause of infections. We have to get them in check.
Right. Well, on the vaccine front, Malaysia is expected to receive the first batch of the Pfizer vaccine on February the 26th. Shannon, we're seeing other countries having trouble with their vaccination drives, whether it's logistical, operational, or just people unwilling to get inoculated. Does Malaysia face the similar problems, and how does the government plan to roll out the vaccines?
Well, as far as vaccine hesitancy in Malaysia goes, it's not too bad. I think the studies show that somewhere from 2/3 or even more than 2/3 are happy and willing to take the vaccine. If you look at people who just outright don't want to take it, I think it's something like 17 or 13%, below 20%, less than 20%. And given that our target is to vaccinate 80% of the population, maybe that might work out, in the math. I think when you drill down to the numbers, you'll find that there are a number of people who say they don't want to take the vaccine, not because they're anti-vaxxers or they think that the vaccine is bad for them. There is this uncertainty about side effects, yes, but I think largely people are wondering, what's the real benefit? I'm going to inject this thing to my body. I don't really know what it is. Then what do I get out of it? It doesn't seem as if it's going to ensure that you can't pass it on to other people. I think that's the current science. It just means that you're less chance of dying. People are wondering, it doesn't mean I can travel internationally. It doesn't mean I can change my current new normal stuff. So what's really the point? I think that's where the government is struggling to convince people this is good for you, because people are asking, so why is it good for me? The only thing that the government can say is that, well, less chance of dying from COVID-19. But this data shows that 85% of people don't even develop very acute symptoms for COVID. As far as logistics are concerned, we did a dry run last week. We sent a plane, and we managed to keep the ultra cold temperature that's needed for the Pfizer vaccine all the way to Belaga. That's one of the most remote districts in Sarawak. So we are able to send it all over the country and to reach the most remote people. Yeah. Of course, this is just one dry run. I think Malaysia is planning to administer something like 50 million doses by the time we are done. So that's going to be a different level of logistics involved. So we'll see. But so far, there hasn't been any real problems. There was some issue with the EU ruling about export authorization, but the governments met with the relevant ambassadors, and that seems to be sorted out.
Well, thanks for the update, Shannon. That was Shannon Teoh, Malaysia Bureau Chief for the Straits Times.
News elsewhere, an Oxford study showed that its COVID-19 vaccine, co-developed with AstraZeneca, had 76% efficacy against symptomatic infection for 3 months after a single dose, which increased if the second shot is delayed. Yet to be peer-reviewed, the findings support Britain's decision to extend the interval between initial and booster doses to 12 weeks, but it doesn't address concerns about a lack of efficacy data for older age groups who have highest priority in Britain's vaccine rollout.
Meanwhile, according to peer-reviewed results published in the Lancet journal, Russia's Sputnik V vaccine was 91.6% effective in preventing people from developing COVID-19. The vaccine has already been rolled out in Russia as well as several other countries. German Chancellor Angela Merkel voiced openness to its use in the European Union once it receives the regulatory nod.
According to the newly formed Myanmar Civil Disobedience Movement, staff at 70 hospitals and medical departments across the country stopped work today to protest against the military coup. A statement from the group said the army had put its own interests above a vulnerable population facing hardships during the pandemic. Myanmar has more than 140,000 COVID-19 cases and 3,100 deaths.
Over in Thailand, Phuket is drawing up plans to fully reopen to vaccinate visitors by October in a bid to revive its wrecked tourism industry. More than a dozen business groups are planning to vaccinate 70% of the island's population above 18 years old without waiting for government rollout. They're hoping that it will be safe to have foreign tourists once the local population achieves herd immunity. Their plan will also waive a mandatory 14-day quarantine requirement for travellers. This all is still subject to government approval.
Tom Moore, who raised a record £38.9 million for Britain's National Health Service, died yesterday after he contracted COVID-19. The World War II veteran was 100 years old. Mr. Moore was taken to hospital after testing positive on January 22nd, but was unable to be vaccinated due to other medication he was taking. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Queen Elizabeth led the tributes to him, with Mr. Johnson saying Mr. Moore was a hero in the truest sense of the word.
Amazon's founder Jeff Bezos will step down as CEO and become its executive chairman. The transition is slated for the third quarter of this year and will make current cloud computing chief Andy Jassy the next CEO. Mr. Bezos said he will concentrate on his philanthropy efforts, which include his Day One Fund and the Bezos Earth Fund. This announcement comes as Amazon reported its third consecutive record profit and quarterly sales above $100 billion for the first time.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Koeh. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.